Yeah.
How young are some of the children you talk to?
We work from children from 3 years old. We work with parents from birth.
From birth?
Yeah, yeah. Just about how to set up a culture of consent in their homes. So I'm going to change your nappy now. Is that okay? Of course, the baby's not going to respond, yes, Mum, that's awesome. I'd love to have my nappy changed. But if you leave a space and wait for body language and wait to make eye contact, then you're letting that child know that their response matters.
Peter! Peter! There's, there's so much duty in here. I can't take it anymore. I haven't eaten in 4 days cause I just can't fit any more in there. Help me!
All right, I'm in my quiet place where I have just been told by Tonka Saw, notorious YouTuber Tonka Saw, who screams at his lunch the quiet place is where no people or entertainment goes. So, Tonka, I'm sorry that I didn't read your mind or some shit. I don't know. It's a long story. Maybe I'll get into it later. But there is this subculture on YouTube called Internet Blood Sports, and I've interviewed Tonka Saw on the show before, and you know, it's such a strange phenomenon that I'm really not qualified to talk about it right now. But I just felt the need to apologize to Tonka Saw for not being a mind reader. So sorry, Tonka. Go have fun deactivating Twitter every other day, whatever. So joining me now is Ben Arzate. Ben, good to have you on
Glad
the
to be
show.
here.
Good to have you back, man. It's been a few weeks, but we'll get to the bipolar book report in a while. I know we've both been feverishly plowing through our to read pile, and I already from what you have been reading and what I've been reading, I can already see a sort of pattern emerging, which will come to manifestation at the end of the show, I guess. But have you been following this whole scandal with Allison Mack and this sex cult Nexium at all?
A little bit. About all I know is that there was like a self-help cult or something like that that a couple of celebrities were members of, and the leader of it was arrested for sexual abuse, and the members, it turns out, were sort of funneling the girls to him.
Yeah, she basically became his, shall we say, recruiter. She tried to recruit Emma Watson to be Keith Randier's, basically, to add Emma Watson to the harem, so to speak. And not only Emma Watson, but Kristen Kruk, a fellow Smallville cast member, was a part of this cult. And it's weird because it has several names. It doesn't just go by Nexium. It also goes by Dos Obsequious, um, uh, Sororitas, I think, which means, male over female or dominant over submissive in Latin, I believe. And when I'm reading this, Ben, over the last few weeks, and I'm seeing this thing play out that just seems like it's all acting out in another dimension of reality. It just seems so unreal, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, When I think about it, not really, because this is like sort of par for the course when it comes to cults. There's a lot. It's not unusual for the leader to turn out to be like a creeper who, who likes who likes boning less than willing or underage girls. I think what makes this more unique is the fact that celebrities are involved with it. So it's sort of like, uh, almost like I don't know, Scientology meets um, meets David Koresh or something like that.
It does have that seedy like element of only we know how to get you better, you know. So let us fuck you, let us caress you, and let us mind fuck you, and just hypnotize you into doing our bidding. It is a fucked up situation, and what a random actress to be presiding over the whole you know sphere of interest with this cult. Allison Mack, why her? Of all the actresses, who do crazy shit, all the celebrities who do crazy shit, like shave their head, uh, one day change their accents randomly out of nowhere, run into telephone poles with their car drunk, and dangle their kids off balconies, throw shit at cameras and paparazzi. Out of all the crazy shit that celebrities do, and all the crazy celebrities out there, why is this Smallville actress the number one person of interest? It just boggles my mind. Like, she seems such a random candidate for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I do recall reading that there was I can't remember his name, but there's a rapper who was involved with that too. So what seems to be the connection, at least between the ones I've seen, is that they're not like A-listers. They're sort of like maybe like B-listers, and I don't mean that in like a oh nobody cares who they are way. Just like they aren't like household names. Like I couldn't have told you their names like a year or so ago.
Right. And they would get these brands on their hips, right? To and they were the initials of Keith Randier, and I think that Allison Mack branded some of them with her initials too, because she's his number one sex toy or whatever, and you can see the complete despair in her eyes as she's led to court and everything. And they didn't allow cameras for her sentencing or her trial, the beginning of her trial or whatever. But there was a courtroom drawing, and her face just looks like it's imploding from like sourpuss. That she's just so in despair that like her face is almost like imploding with sadness. And I read this shit and I almost want to think, man, this chick sounds like a badass, like a real fun, Friday night. But then I hear about Catherine Oxenberg's daughter uh, trying to get out of this, or Catherine Oxenberg trying to extract her daughter from this cult, and getting no end of death threats and legal troubles for it. And then I hear about actual child trafficking. That is one of the charges with Allison Mack, is child trafficking. And then I think, how did she fall so far from an actress on Smallville? The object of adoration for the CW generation, or the WB or whatever, to this. She's penniless, from what I understand. She's probably singing like a canary. I would say she took a plea deal, or is going to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, probably, most likely.
And it's interesting because I look back through, the news wire over the last few years, going back to 2009, 10, with this cult, and I see that people were trying to expose it then, and they were being branded conspiracy theorists. They were being uh, accused of being prejudiced against someone's religion, which Scientologists like to use that a lot. As you said, Scientology is a good comparison. And I've seen it, just going back through articles. I have seen news journalists trying to cover this phenomenon, this cult, honestly, and with scrutiny. Their careers and lives have been ruined. They've been sued into non-existence. They've been jailed. Their accounts have been hacked and all sorts of crazy shit. And I think it is the highest point of justice that Keith Randier is now, you know, and Allison Mack are looking down the barrel at possibly life sentences, although I don't think they'll give Allison Mack life sentences because a pretty face uh, that's full of tears generally gets a slap on the wrist. I don't know. What do you think? What do you see in their futures legally?
Um, with the actress you said, yeah, I've already forgotten her name because
Allison Mack.
that's how that Allison Mack. That's how little I know about her. But the yeah, I definitely think she probably won't get a life sentence, even if she maybe deserves one. At least partially because, like you said, she's probably gonna take a plea deal. And the fact that she is a woman and a relative, an actress, that's probably going to get her definitely something lighter. And like you said, the when you think about how someone falls into this, well, that's kind of how cults operate. They take someone who seems to be normal and well adjusted, and just twist them into twist people into parodies of themselves in service of the cult leader. Though in this case, since she's been arrested, that probably gave her like a big pimp slap back into reality.
Yeah, I just wonder, upon being seduced by this guy in this cult, whatever things in her mind that she thought he was unlocking for her or helping her unlock, I just wonder on a scale of 1 to 10 in the on the crazy spectrum, uh, one being like bipolar disorder, and 10 being like slathering mayonnaise in your hair and stabbing at horse flies with a knife. You know, I wonder where would you place her on that scale?
Honestly, I haven't seen enough to really give a judgment. The like based on the little bit that I've seen, I'd say maybe like a maybe an 8 or a 9.
Yeah, that seeing that sad face, man. I hate to cuck to her, but it does make me feel bad for her that she made these choices. But and then I'm reminded of that child trafficking charge, and I'm thinking, what is with that? What children are they talking about? And then I hear this whispering over here from the QAnon crowd. How familiar are you with them?
And what were they called again?
QAnon.
Oh, I've heard of that. I don't put much stock in that, to be honest.
I mean, it seems kind of like self fulfilling prophecy with the kind of leads that they chase. However, uh, I'm hearing whispers from their community that the sex cult Nexium may have been selling children to the Clintons and that crime family.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't put much stock in that. I don't I don't think Hillary or Bill are directly involved with any sort of like child trafficking. I think like maybe they have like associates who they know who are into it, but they don't say anything because that's just what they are.
Fair enough. Um, do you now or have you ever been read comics?
Yeah.
Like, what was the last comic you read off the top of your head?
Uh, Off the top of my head, let's see. It's probably it was a manga that was about it was basically a food porn manga. I can't remember the name of it. It doesn't have a plot. It's basically just about various kinds of like Japanese alcohol and Japanese food and things like that.
Huh? I
Which
remember.
I like to eat, so I like
Do you
food
now?
porn occasionally.
Do you now?
Yeah.
Best of both worlds. You like to cook?
I've gotten more into cooking, though I'm not great at it.
Well, I hope that you don't. I hope that you don't have an appetite later when we discuss that one book that I mentioned before we got on the air, because it might very well you might very well lose it. Um, but the reason I bring up comic books, how familiar are you with Mark Wade? He's had a storied career in comic books, right?
I've heard the name. Wasn't he on X-Men or something like that, or has he done like a bunch of things?
Yeah,
I don't know. That's
I've
one thing I guess that I have a problem with American comics. Like, there's like a few like sort of auteur comic creators, but there's not many. So for me, it's
Neil
kind of hard to
Gaiman.
get a sense on like
Yeah, Neil
of
Gaiman,
of the writers' personalities.
Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, that type of guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, there was this guy. He's a YouTuber named Diversity in Comics, and he's constantly poking fun at this SJW, like social justice warrior type, politically correct, sensibility that has infested comic books and generally made, uh, most comic fans like cringe. They don't want that kind of overt political correctness in their superhero comics. And you can understand that. Here's the problem: is that there has been research to prove that the types of people who want to enforce diversity, to a fascist, level, don't buy comic books. They don't even buy the comic books that they claim to support that do this. And so basically, they're kind of taking the air out of the sales of real comic book fans. And there's a big war going on between creators and readers right now because creators have to walk this tightrope of political correctness, and embracing diversity and everything. Now, on its face, that's well intentioned and good enough. You don't want to make enemies with people based on their gender, color, culture, etc., etc. However, they should also not antagonize you, correct? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Having like a contempt for your readers, that's not a good look. There's very few authors that can have obvious contempt for their readers and still have a readership, and
I,
even then, they eventually uh, run out of steam.
I think it worked for Harlan Ellison for his
Yeah, that's
entire
what I
life.
was thinking of.
How can you not think of Harlan Ellison? I mean, in relation to that. Now, what happened was this guy, his name's Zach something, I can't remember, but he came back from the Middle East and got into comic books real good, and he started this crowdfunding initiative for his own comic book called Jawbreakers. Okay,
Hmm.
and it raised. Hang on, let me pull it up here because it actually outdid the creator of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and his recent Indiegogo effort.
Hmm.
I mean, that's pretty strong, man. It says here that he raised 262,643 uh, in funds for this graphic novel, Jawbreakers: Lost Souls. A team of ex superheroes attempt to save a monster from a vicious warlord who wants to exploit it. And, he's kind of bucking the trend of political correctness with this comic. And so he got it. He got an agreement to go in with this press, a small press, like a fringe press called Antarctic Press. Now, after he gets this going, and he's celebrating the success of this campaign, he gets a call from this guy at Antarctic Press, and he says that he sounded like in tears as he was breaking the news to him that Mark Wade called and basically threatened to blacklist the guy and get, all the stores that he could, persuade to not carry this comic. There were comic stores that were actually contacting Antarctic Press and saying, "We're not interested in carrying Jawbreakers." And Mark Wade was leading the initiative and threatening this guy at Antarctic Press, uh, not to carry this, to publish this, or he'd be blackballed out of the industry. And so he caves like a little bitch. He caves. I think that's cowardly. And there are people defending him, saying, "Oh, well, he works in the medical industry, and the comics are a passion for him, a side project, and you don't want to, sometimes you fight with a skunk, and you're not afraid of the bite, but you're afraid of the stink, whatever." every time these people bend the knee to these you know, I don't know what to call them, commie pinkos, fascists, SJWs, whatever you want to call them, it only emboldens them more. That's why I got so furious when Laura Ingraham bent the knee to David Hogg when all her sponsors started to pull out of her show. And David Hogg rejected her apology and called for even stronger sponsor bans. So these people, they're incapable of accepting apologies. They only double down. That's all they know is to go even harder. So the more that people cave to this shit, what is your take on that? Do you think?
Yeah, that's really fucking cowardly and ridiculous. Like, I don't know what Jawbreakers was about, but um, I can't imagine that um it was like anything like it was like a pro-Nazi thing or some whatever, like actual pro-Nazi, not like fake everybody I don't like is a Nazi, but the on one hand, like yeah, it's fucked up that he blackballed him from like comic stores and things like that, because I'm sure that's still a big outlet for a lot of people. But on the other, if you really wanted to keep at it, I would say like throw up the middle finger and just like put it out on like a Comixology, like sell it through your direct sell like PDFs directly to people. It's a lot easier to like um, self-publish now. So I think like if that does happen, if someone says we're blackballing you from the industry, just like go do it on your own, basically,
Yeah,
because that's what I very strongly advocate. Is it's easier to like self-publish and go around these gatekeepers more than ever. So it really makes no sense to cave to them. Just say like, well, okay, I'll just go do it myself. Fuck you.
well, it gets better. There's a happy ending to this, at least for now, and because Richard C. Meyer, who I'm not familiar with, and John Mallon, who I think is most well known for the new Cable series from Marvel. Uh, John Mallon has been vocally opposed to these types of people in his industry, and so him and Richard C. Meyer are teaming up to form this imprint called Splato Comics, and they're going to publish Jawbreakers now. So uh, that's where that's at. I just had to bring that up. I mean, it's just the more that they cave to these people, and their threats. And you're telling me that in 2018 there was no other form of legal recourse for these kinds of threats. I mean, blacklisting probably had more plausibility as a real threat in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. When McCarthyism was taking root and everything, where if you were exposed as a commie or questioned, there were real threats of, being, outcasted from any, creative industry. Like what happened with Arthur Miller, author of Death of a Salesman. Um, but I just think in 2018 there had to have been some other form of recourse than to just say, okay, so just take it easy. I won't publish it. Just stop, you know, stop harassing me. What a weak need. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, so
Yeah. As far as like a legal recourse, I honestly don't know if there's like any sort of criminal recourse. As far as like civil recourse, it probably would cost more to like actually like try to sue them than what it would actually be worth,
yeah,
which is another big problem. I mean, since I can sort of recognize Mark Wade's name, I assume he has enough money for a good lawyer, whereas a small press probably doesn't.
yeah. See him and diversity in comics guy Zach, whatever his name is. They've had this rivalry for a while, and it's like Mark Waid is so committed to this, new era of social justice that it's almost like his comics and his creativity get lost in the mix. And he's talking about how he's going to stand up for the little guy and everything. And it's interesting and very telling that he completely nuked his Twitter in reaction to this diversity in comics YouTuber's comic getting picked up by Splato, and everyone just totally, threatening to boycott Marvel and Disney. And if Daddy Disney gets wind of this, and wants to pounce on it, I mean, Mark Wade's days could be numbered. if they can get rid of Jim Starlin, they can get rid of anybody. But so that's where that's at for now. What's been going on with you? It's been a while since we talked, and truthfully, we don't even know each other as much as we should, as much as you've been on the show. What are your
Uh,
pursuits right now?
let's see. Well, but in my personal life, I've just basically just been working, hanging out with friends, hanging out with my girlfriend, things like that. I do have some good news. I do have a couple books coming out uh, later in the year. We don't have a release date for this, but later in the year, my first novel, Story of the Why, will be coming out from Cabal Books, a fairly new press. And the my short story collection, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Saying Goodbye, will be coming out from Nihilism Revised.
Nihilism Revised. That sounds familiar. Is that run by a guy named Zach too?
Yeah,
Okay, I
Zach
know who it
Ferguson.
is. Yeah, the covers have this very interesting visual style where it's like black, white, and noirish, right?
Yeah, very zine-ish kind of looking.
Yes. Okay, I know who you're talking about. The Complete Idiot's Guide to Saying Goodbye. That is a perfect title, man. I can't wait to
Thank
read
you.
that. And Story of the Why. What is the why?
Y refers to Y Beckhurst, who is a anonymous musician from. Well, he was originally released his records in New York, and like nothing is known about him, like almost absolutely nothing. And I really do enjoy the record that he put out. So, what Story of the Why is about a music journalist going to Mexico with some of his friends to try to track down Y Beckhurst.
Hmm. Okay. Well, congratulations. What did you say the Story of the Why was coming out through?
It's coming out through Cabal Books. I don't know if you've heard of Thick and Veiny Books, but
That
originally
sounds
it was supposed to
familiar.
come out through them.
Uh-huh.
But the guy who runs Thick and Veiny, he started a new imprint for Thick and Veiny for more quote unquote literary books,
Hmm.
and he decided to put Story of the Y out through that.
Yeah.
They just recently released the first book through that imprint. It's called Goldenrod by Bram Riddlebarger. I have a copy of it. I haven't read it, but it's been, but it's, but the publisher called it like a mixture of Cormac McCarthy and Richard Browdigan. So I'm look very much to forward to reading it.
Dude, Richard Browdigan was amazing. Can we agree on that?
Oh yeah, I love everything I've read from them so far.
Trout Fishing in America, In
That's great.
Watermelon Sugar, uh, an underrated one, a very underrated one, Sombrero Fallout, where this guy keeps like tossing like failed pages of a novel he's trying to work on, and like people live. I think if I remember correctly, people live under a sombrero in his trash can or something. They're like real tiny people, if I remember correctly. Uh, but man, Browdigan was amazing. It's like a more drunk Lewis Carroll, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a hippie Lewis Carroll. In
Yeah.
fact, that's one thing that's very notable about him is he's very hippie-ish, but at the same time he feels very timeless.
Mhm. You know, there is this scene in Watermelon Sugar that I will never forget. It is at the same time it is hilarious and poignant and profound. And it's the most amazing thing that he achieves this duality of emotion. And I don't know how much you remember about that book, but it's in the scene where this guy named Inboyle is try. Hang on, the cat must be appeased. The cat wants out and the cat wants in and the cat wants out again, and you'll hear that creak of the door and the meow of the cat throughout every episode for the rest of uh, our lives because I am a slave to the cat. But anyway, um, so in Watermelon Sugar, In Boyle basically says that the community of Ideth in which they live is not what it used to be, and that they killed all the tigers off, which were these. I don't know if they actually literally were tigers or if they were like spirits who looked over the town of Ideth or what. But he says that once all the tigers were dead, Ideth was no longer Ideth. And so he keeps saying, I'm going to show you what Ideth is one day. I'm going to make this place Ideth again. And the guy who runs the commune there, Charlie, one day he says he sees Inboyle wandering drunk with his posse of fellow drunkards. And he says, you want me to show you what Ideth really is? And he says, well, you seem to know what Ideth is, Inboyle. Go ahead, tell me what Ideth is. And then he proceeds. Do you know the scene?
Yeah, it's when they slit their own throats, don't they?
Well, first they start cutting off their fingers.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
Inboyle says, "This is Ideth, and this is Ideth," and he's cutting off his index finger and his middle finger, and he says, "Right, men, now off with their noses." So they cut off their noses, and then they cut off their ears. And Charlie's saying, "You know, you're a damn fool." And he says, "What? I can't hear you. I just cut off my ears." And so they're bleeding out, and you know they're getting pale, but they're celebrating. They're getting all joculatory about it, saying, "Yeah, this is Ideth. We brought it back." And meanwhile, the girl, one of the girls there, I think her name was Barbara or Margaret, she goes and gets a mop and a bucket, and the main character, who I don't think we ever get the name of, asks her if she's all right, and she says, "Oh, I'm all right. I'm just gonna get a mop and a bucket to clean up this mess." And she says it with this tone of derision and spite and everything. And as Inboyle lies dying in a pool of his own blood and his friend's blood and everything, he says, "We brought back Ideth. This is Ideth." and then Margaret or Barbara, whatever her name is, says, "The only thing you are is a damn fool." And that is the most poignant passage because you can get so many meanings out of that, or you can just laugh at the whimsical prose of it, right?
Right. That's the thing about In Watermelon Sugar. I really don't remember a lot of the details, but I remember like the mood. It's very, very dreamlike. It actually did like recalling it does feel like trying to recall like a dream that I had a while ago, which to me was like a big appeal to it.
What was the dream?
That's Go ahead.
What was the dream?
Well, it's a dream where there was a place where there was this sort of hippie-ish commune. That's how I envision iDeath, and they make things out of watermelon sugar somehow. Like I picture them just like taking like sugar they've extracted from watermelon and just carving it into items. And I remember the part where that takes place, where the Inboyle is cutting themselves up and his gang are cutting themselves up. I remember that it was like a sort of like clockwork looking place, like a rusted out looking place,
Yeah.
something like that.
Right.
So
yeah, they made lanterns out of watermelon sugar and street lights, windows, and that's a weird visual. You kind of have to improvise to envision what watermelon sugar made into items would look like, right?
right, and it seems like there is a sort of uh, theme of industrial society versus more primitive society at play. That's maybe sort of where like the idea of what iDeath used to be versus what it became. Like iDeath, I mean that makes you think of like iPhone or things like that now, which is a kind of a weird. Which I always thought was a weird coincidence, but I think in the context of that, iDeath is more in the case of like a Buddhist idea of ego death. So it's this idea of like the sort of Buddhist concept of ego death, of becoming like one with nature and letting everything around you flow, versus the more active, self-destructive kind of literal eye death, death of a self.
Huh. Wow, man, that's it's you're going all like just you're going all Buddhist on me. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
interesting. Ego death. Yeah, because they're very integrated. Everybody except for Inboyle and his gang, everybody kind of pitches in, right? It's like the perfect, like idealized society of what could be if we just, kept to our roots and were honest people, right?
right. The thing is, like, I never saw eye death as like a sort of utopia. It comes close to being it, but it still feels just like a commune, just like a place where people live their everyday life and they're satisfied, but they're not like constantly euphoric or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still like romantic conflicts and conflicts with people like In Boyle and the drunkards and so forth. Uh, so it did feel like it was like I Death was more about uh, was in fact like the that's where I sort of get the Buddhist thing is it's not like a utopia. It's not a paradise where nothing bad happens. It's a place that sort of accepts the world as it is and just lets it flows around them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very zen, right? That's the word I was
Right.
looking for. Zen. You're going zen on me. um, you know, speaking of zen, I think that's I finally figured out what my frame of mind is if I were to give it a name, and that it's weird because I can accept two opposing views and internalize them, right? And in a way, because my one of my teachers in high school taught me the value of paradigm shifts. You're familiar with that term, right?
Yeah.
The value of paradigm shifts, where you can believe one thing, but if the situation calls for it, you can convince yourself or you know encourage yourself to switch over to this one temporarily and view it through the lens of you know the lens of plausibility that allows you to believe that as well. And with a media as fractured as ours is, you kind of have to be able to shift your paradigm because I can listen to an afternoon of InfoWars with Alex Jones, and I can totally buy or mostly buy into what he says. I know, call me crazy for that. And then I can go over here to this smaller community of the QAnon people who believe that someone embedded in the White House is ferrying messages out to the denizens of the, interwebs and helping them to solve mysteries involving the Clinton mafia, uh, scandal, the Clinton organized crime family, and globalism and everything. And Alex Jones and the QAnon people are not seeing eye to eye, but I can shift paradigms from one to the other. And I think that paradigm shifts, in a way, are associated with the concept of Zen, which is what? Accepting, the world around you and looking at it, as it is, not what it could be, right? Isn't that Zen?
Right. That's a definitely a big part of it. Yeah. It's similar to um, the idea of stoicism, the idea of like accepting what you can't change and working to change what you can, and that's also the Serenity Prayer.
Yeah. But I also believe so firmly in the concept of individuality. I'm getting some reverb or buzzing in the background. You know what that is?
Oh, that's my air conditioner. Is that too loud?
Uh,
I can go turn that off if it is.
I
I was worried it would start
well,
buzzing.
I don't want to. I don't want you to burn up, but it's up to you. I can work with it. Uh, I can work with a little bit of white noise. It's not so loud that it's overbearing, but do what
Yeah.
do what thou wilt.
Yeah, it's cool enough. So go on what you were saying about individuality while I get that turned off.
Okay. Well, I also woo. I also believe firmly in the idea of individuality. Not so much that I believe that we should be legislating or people should be legislating to change laws that affect us, like white middle class males or anyone else. I only use that as an example because I'm a white, slightly middle class male. But I do believe in individuality. Um, but I don't believe. Jesus.
Hey there.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It sounded like you.
Well, I still hear it.
What is that?
It sounds like
Oh, it's. I think that's.
Truckzilla
What?
or something.
Oh, it looks like that's. I guess that's my neighbor's air conditioning.
Oh boy. Well, we can't do anything about that, can we?
Yeah,
All right, we'll
yeah.
work
I
with
thought
it,
it was
dude.
mine, but I guess it's the neighbor's.
Yeah, we'll work with it, brother. So I mean, it sounded like the bellows of the dragon smog or something. But so I think I think at the end of the day, I've pondered over this so much. Uh, am I a conservative, a libertarian? Well, I mean, maybe a little bit of both. But at the end of the day, I think I would have to classify myself as something else. And people out there, accuse me of being self-important, but identity does matter, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does to an extent. Like I personally I consider myself an anarchist, both in like a literal and a figurative sense.
Yeah.
I do like in the long term do believe in abolishing the state, but even in like the short term, it comes from a just a skepticism towards anything that claims authority.
Yeah. Um, I think I would have to call myself a zendividualist.
That's an interesting. You might want to like look into elaborating on that in like an essay or something at some point because that's an interesting idea.
Like a manifesto, right?
Yeah.
Zendividualism. Yeah, I don't know. It has a nice ring to it. It has a nice connotation. Whereas you're not killing off your ego. You're not stripping yourself of desire, but you're also willing to accept certain things. And with things going on with mom right now, uh, man, it's brutal because I made three separate trips to the hospital yesterday on Mother's Day. And I didn't go too far into it on 2 shows ago, but I spoke enough about it, from my perspective because I just had to get it out. Uh, on Mother's Day, I go down there after work to check on her. I come home, then I find out they're moving her to, they're taking her to the ER to look at something. Uh, I get to back to the place where she's staying, and they tell me that the ambulance has already taken her out. They were supposed to call me. The nurse said she would call me and notify me when they were doing it, but she did not. Um, so I wasted a trip there, beat feet, rush over to the other hospital, the ER where they took her, stay with her there. Then go back to the other hospital when it turns out that it was a false alarm, a lab error that sent her to the ER, which she said she felt fine. And you know what? I will take a lab error over. I will take a knee jerk lab error over, you know, malpractice, neglect, malfeasance, uh, some sort of problem that could have been addressed. If staff workers weren't so lazy or dysfunctional, right? I'll take the lab error any day, right?
Right. Definitely.
So, and then the ambulance beats me by like a minute back to where she's been staying. And so that was my afternoon and morning, afternoon, and evening on Mother's Day. But I wouldn't trade it for the world because consider the alternative. And for sure, she felt appreciated yesterday. And Mom, I know you'll hear this at some point. I love you. And you got a lot of people rooting for you. And but I think about this sometimes, and we won't dwell on this too long. But I think a lot now. It's when this is knocking on my door. This mortality is knocking on my door. After being shown death through fiction for my entire life, right? And
Right.
only having to deal with it with like relatives and pets, like distant relatives and pets, coming face to face with it, and being threatened with it, coming to the very edge, the precipice of it. It is so much more real and more frightening than you can imagine through fiction. There are probably instances in fiction that appropriately capture the concept of mortality, but oftentimes it's almost anthropomorphized. It's like a dumbed down version of what it really means to give up the ghost, right?
Right. And this is like semi related to that, but I think like the best like literary capturing of death that I've seen is the is from Michelle Welbeck's book Whatever. There's a passage in it. I can't remember it verbatim, but it's something along the lines of uh, it's just he's it's saying that the main character is saying he's unable to conceive of the idea that he's going to eventually die, and he notes that people think that like if you're like alive, something isn't going to eventually happen, but that's not always the case. It is very possible for a life to be completely meaningless with days going by with little to distinguish between them, and then just one day they stop,
Yeah.
which is a very depressing way of looking at it. But it's one of those things that, um, but to me, it's like you can either like view that in a depressing way or view it as like a motivator.
True. And I mean, what I think what scares me more than anything is that you can still hear me, right?
Yeah,
I think what scares me more than anything is that I'm so attached to the what animates the flesh, the soul, the mind, the heart, the spirit, that I cannot conceive even now in my mind of a body shutting down and giving up. It's like I can't rationalize it in my mind. Can you understand that?
yeah, it's hard to conceive of just like nothing, even like envisioning just blackness and silence. That's still envisioning something, but it's like even darkness and silence beyond that. There is no there.
I've heard the human body compared to a computer. And, if you do certain activities that can damage this, like say with the comparison of a computer, if you visit too many sites with malware and viruses and everything, and you don't, keep things up to date and nice and tidy, Norton antivirus, and you don't scan, you don't, use pop-up blockers and, adware blockers and malware, protect for all that stuff, and be skeptical of certain websites you might come across. Um, then the computer will start to start to lag behind. It'll have trouble starting up and shutting down. You'll have like files go missing or get corrupted, and I guess that's an accurate comparison with the body. Certain activities can lead to files or body parts shutting down, and it's just but it seems like with something animating the flesh that you should be able to fight it off no matter what. But sometimes, I mean, that's not obviously. We've been here for thousands and thousands of years, maybe longer, and that is not the case. Humans have been dying as long as they've been living, and it's just I have a hard time, even as close as I've come to it. I have a hard time understanding it, and I don't want to, but I know it's inevitable for all of us, but you don't really understand until you're there, I guess.
Right, exactly.
And I'll leave that there because I'm both scaring the hell out of myself and depressing myself. But so we got this show together to do a bipolar book report, and we've already kind of warmed the furnace with in watermelon sugar. Why don't you start us off, pal? What do you got for us this week?
And first book I wanted to talk about was Apocalypse Culture because Adam Parfrey, the editor, and he was also the founder of Feral Books. He passed just this recent Thursday from a massive stroke, which to me was a very big loss to the book world. Feral House is one of the few um, completely fearless presses in my mind. They've put out things that I don't think anyone else would either touch, either because it's too weird or it's too taboo, things like that.
So
And
he he
Parfrey himself,
he ran
go
Feral
ahead.
House. I'm sorry, he ran Feral House.
He ran it and he was the founder. So
Shit.
he um, he was like the central figure of it. I mean, there are people who will carry it on, but I can't imagine it will be the same without him because he really was a very central figure to that, both in the books he put together and in the things that he chose and so forth. So what I wanted to talk about was his first major book and what I think is his most important one, Apocalypse Culture. Um, like if you uh, if you I don't know if you've ever read this, but the way I like to describe the book is that it has an article from Anton LaVey, and he's probably the most normal article in there. Um, let's see. One of the most interesting articles is by Parfrey himself. It's called Aesthetic Terrorism,
Huh.
which is he he goes over the idea that there's like certain art that the establishment, the bourgeois, whatever you want to call them, thinks are shocking, but in reality, it's just serves their interests. And he talks about the idea of like trying to find art that genuinely beats up against the taboos of society, um, art that genuinely shocks the bourgeois and can't be co-opted by them. Uh, and he actually uses that as an introduction to an interview with Peter Sotos, which is
Oh, that guy is really controversial.
yeah, exactly. Um, this was when Peter Sotos was still doing Pure, and it was I think this came out like right after he was arrested for where Peter Sotos was arrested for possession of child pornography.
Oh shit.
Um, and keep in mind that Sotos was actually like the first person in the United States convicted under that law, which is weird when you think about it. That child pornography wasn't really like something people were arrested for until the 80s.
That's scary. That is scary.
Yeah, so it
Gee.
was for Sotos. It was easy for him to get like a magazine from like Denmark or something like that. Um, some of the other articles in it are the Muslim Program by Elijah Muhammad. It's of course the uh, it's a overview of Nation of Islam's ideas. So even though it's a Muslim program, it's really not. It's the Nation of Islam's uh, program, which um, to digress a little, and again, Adam Parfrey actually later put out a book called Extreme Islam, which was a examination of the extreme factions of Islam. And the thing is, had started researching that book before 9/11 happened, like right before 9/11 happened,
Huh?
and then 9/11 happened, and apparently he after that he had trouble doing his research to finish up the book because a lot of the information that had been like online out in the open by Islamic extremists was being taken down because of the obviously the United States government was cracking down. So that that was again is like why I think he's an important writer because he had his finger on the pulse of those kind of things. Like he it's almost like he knew like extremist Islam was going to be the next paradigm that uh, affected the world, and that's definitely been the case. That's another thing when you read apocalypse culture, like you can see like a this is like where we're at now. A lot of what is in this book was bubbling up at this time. You can there's a article in here about it's called the Christian Right, Zionism, and the coming of the Penta Holocaust, which is like I said, it's about the conservative Christian view of Zionism. Like it's the there would I don't know how much influence they have now because I think the Christian right has sort of lost a lot of political clout.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but for a while they did have quite a bit, and a big reason why probably a big reason why Zionism had the influence that it did in America is a number of the Christian right was very pro-Zionist because they believed that that would um, lead to like the end times because they believe that like the temple being rebuilt is would be a sign of uh, the rapture and Jesus coming back and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else is in here that I want to talk about. There's a broadside from the Society for Eradication of Television fact sheet, which was, of course, a sort of uh, they weren't much of a society, but they were like just a loose knit group of people who were very skeptical of the media, and like television isn't quite as important as it was before, but with the advent of the internet, you start to think like maybe they had a point about the danger of mass media.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And Anton LaVey's contribution actually isn't about Satanism. It's called The Invisible War. It's about methods that he believes that the United States government is doing to sort of like tap down on dissidents. Um, he believes that AIDS is a government conspiracy. He believes that the weather is being controlled in order to you know uh, mess with people's moods.
Now this is Anton
Um,
LaVey that says this, right?
right, and he
Okay.
also talks about things like food and beverage and microwaves being used to tap down on dissidents.
So
So that's
if he were still alive, he would probably be a guest on Infowars. Well,
probably
no,
yeah. That
no,
would be
no.
an interesting
Well, yeah, but this
interesting.
the whole Satanist thing would exclude him. But but other than that, I mean, he would have a lot in common with that audience, and
Yeah, exactly. There's like contributions from anarchists here, like radical anarchists like John Zurgen and Hakan Bey. One of the funnier articles in it is called "Cut It Off: A Case for Self-Castration," which is Adam Parfrey sort of poking fun at the idea of body modification and arguing that the ultimate end of that would be self-castration. And that's actually used as sort of an intro to the performance artist Fakir Musafar, whose entire repertoire is about that, about extreme body modification.
hold that thought because this is something totally relevant to that I saw the other day. Have you heard about this chick? This kind of supports his statement about body modification. You said Adam Parfrey wrote that article.
Yeah,
There is a woman who cut off the lips of her labia and dipped them in glitter after they dried out and everything and were sanitized, and she wears them as jewelry now. So he's not that far off. I
right. And when you think of the people who are trying to modify themselves to be like human lizards and things like that,
Yeah, didn't that guy commit suicide?
I don't know because I can think of at least like 3 or 4 people who are trying to become human lizards.
I know the guy who wanted to be a tiger. He committed suicide, and he was really miserable by the end. I think that these people reach a point with their extreme body modification, where they start, looking back and saying, maybe this wasn't the right thing. Actually, I think the lizard guy is profiting and living high off his look. But I know that the tiger guy committed suicide. And let's see, what other examples of body modification are there? Oh shit, there was. But I'm looking through the articles here. Model turns her labia into a necklace after they were cut off. This woman turned her vulva into a necklace after vagina surgery. Uh, and it's just article after article here. Yeah, and they're yeah. I think that some of them are separate cases. And you remember the guy in maybe Finland or something who got his face like surgically reconstructed to look like the Red Skull from
Yeah, I've seen that.
how how can you sleep at night, soundly, you know, resting in that decision making? I can't get my head around it. Okay, I just wanted to bring those cases up to reinforce the article. Go ahead, proceed.
And let's see. And one more thing I wanted to point out was the article from Hakambe. I have like very mixed feelings on Hakambe. He does have some genuinely interesting ideas, but he's very open in his support of pederasty, so that makes me a bit uncomfortable. But he does have a good article here called Instructions for the Kali Yuga. It's the idea that we're living in an age that's incredibly chaotic, that it's um, like the best thing I can think of is like the Kali Yuga is like the flood, where there's a bunch of chaos and destruction, and that eventually gives way to a golden age. I don't necessarily believe we're entering a golden age or anything like that, but it does have some interesting ideas about the chaos of modern society. He calls it creative nihilism. So I definitely think that's definitely worth reading. Well, the whole
They're
book's definitely worth. Go ahead.
well, this book was assembled and written in the '90s, if I recall right, or is it 2000, the early 2000s?
1987 is when it came out.
Oh wow, it must have gotten a
Yes.
reprinting then, because I remember it being talked about in the early 2000s. I recognize that title. Um,
Yeah. It
yeah,
was. It did have a second edition in the '90s, which is the edition that I have.
okay.
But I do think the reason it did start being talked about then is because that's really when everything that was bubbling under the surface when it was published started coming up,
Mhm.
which is why I think this is such an important book. I think if you really want to understand why our culture is where it is, I think Apocalypse Culture is an essential read.
Alrighty.
And I, that's why I think Adam Parfrey is such a big loss to us, because he really did have his finger on the pulse a lot more than I think even a lot of his people who praise him give him credit for. So he'll very much be missed.
My thoughts are with Adam Parfrey's friends and family. I'm sure he had a lot of friends. Um, and I thank him and whoever else at Feral House had the gumption to publish Death Confetti by Jennifer Robin, which is still one of my favorites from the last few years. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but that's a great read.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. The thing with like Feral House is like 90% of what they put out, I want to read. I think actually when I think about it, I think the most well-known book from Feral House is Lords of Chaos.
Oh, the
About
black metal, right?
Right, and
Yeah.
that was actually just recently made into a movie.
What?
Yeah, it was.
that is
And
that was some great painstaking research went into that book, man. They talked about all the church burnings and the early days of black metal and death metal and blackened death metal and grindcore and hate metal and anarchy metal and I don't know what else metal. And the point is,
yeah, that
yeah,
yeah. Point is, they put out some amazing work, and Adam Parfrey was the central figure in that. So having him gone is, I think, a huge loss to the publishing world.
Lost another soldier in the arts, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still reeling about the loss of Art Bell. What a loss that was to talk radio. Anybody who is slightly skew of, the mainstream, radio feels that loss. Anybody who has ever done anything different on radio owes a great deal to Art Bell. And I'm sorry to detract from that. The point is that Art Bell, Adam Parfrey, there are many creative, frontiersmen who are passing into the night, and it's sad. I I think I'll start off my selections with a slightly lighter picture of death. Are you familiar with the Mountain Man series by Keith Blackmore?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
This one cropped up out of nowhere for me as a Goodreads or Amazon recommendation. And Mountain Man, the first novel by Keith Blackmore, it's about this guy named Gus, who is living in the aftermath of some, apocalyptic virus that wiped out most of humanity, converted them into zombies. We've seen it all before. Zombies are a played out trope. But somehow, Keith Blackmore is still able to infuse some life into the dead genre of zombies. So Gus lives up in the mountains, like on this winding, mountain road, in this house that he built and stocked very well as I think he was a prepper. And his girlfriend lived with him for several winters before dying because she was just not strong enough to live in post civilization, And I think he's got a generator. He's able to still watch, DVDs and stuff. And he's got bottled water for years, stored away, medical supplies. Well, he occasionally goes down into the city to forage for more supplies, right? And he's always sure to get, all the rum he can and the beer and all that, which he calls fuel, basically. And I think in the later books, he actually exhibits this sign of senility, where that movie Castaway, where he paints a face, he draws a face on the beach ball and calls him Wilson.
Yeah.
He does that with a bottle of Captain Morgan's rum. And so Captain Morgan is constantly egging him on and saying, "If you quit, you're a pussy," and all this stuff, And I could have killed all three of those zombies, with no weapons, and he kind of eggs him on.
I thought I was the only one who had Captain Morgan bottles telling him to kill.
Yeah, but it's interesting because he saves this guy with a broken leg who has been captured by this maniac, and the guy's name escapes me, but he's like a sociopath who, in the post-civilized world, is basically able to be an open sociopath, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So he rescues this guy from this crazy guy. The guy's name is Scott, and he takes him back to the mountain, house, and helps him, reset his leg, put it back in joint, and, heals him up as best he can and makes progress, hooks him up with some movies and a piss bucket and everything, a nice recliner, and they get to know each other in the dead of winter. And occasionally he has to get out the shotgun, and kill some zombies who have wandered up into his purview, his neck of the woods. There are a few close calls as he goes down into the city to get more supplies. And when Scott is better, he actually accompanies him, and they're all suited up in football helmets and vest, protective gear, and everything. armor and baseball bats, the whole 9 yards. Total prepper, looks. Now, something happens when a woman is rescued. They rescue a woman from being raped by a guy. They take her back to the mountain house in the first novel. And I don't want to spoil too much, but just to say that it's kind of an inside job. What happens to the little rustic mountain home that Gus built? Scott, seeing that this woman is not trustworthy, but before Gus can, bids him farewell because he's going to go after this crazy guy who kidnapped him and killed his family and broke his leg and was going to torture him and everything. Scott parts ways with Gus. Gus is left alone with this woman who he saved from rape, who he now loves. And, they think they're going to live out, many years of happiness in this mountain home, occasionally killing zombies. Something happens that makes that go horribly awry. Then we go to Safari, which is book 2. And I can't remember if Safari is from Scott's point of view solely. I think it's from Gus's view and Scott's point of view, both. But by the time we get around to book 3, which is, I think, Halifax, the old world is gone. People are adapting to this post-civilized world. They set up little communities like Walking Dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Gus has basically found his new heaven in this community where he is looked at as like a warrior, a protector, and they have their own little pecking order, their own little bureaucracy in this little community. And it just spirals out from there. By the time we get to book 4, which I think is called Well Fed, we have come full circle, and Gus and Scott have pursued their own adventures across this zombie-ridden wasteland with occasional, hints of, civilization. And Gus raids a mansion as an assignment from the mayor of the new town. He survives that, and he meets his long-lost brother. Now, by this point, Keith Blackmore was kind of reaching for like dramatic, topping the drama, the gravitas of the plot, So he had to dip into that whole long lost relative, where have you been and you've never changed. You know what I mean, right?
Right.
Basically, his brother is a fascist, and he keeps him drugged up and everything. And he also meets this woman in this new community, who is in love with a zombie who is desperately fighting to keep his humanity. It's fascinating. It's one of the most fascinating parts of the later Mountain Men books. To say any more than I have, is going to rob anybody who might want to read this. So pick up the Mountain Men series by Keith Blackmore. It's a well-rounded quadrilogy, I guess. And I'll end, that first selection on that note. What else you got for me?
That definitely sounds like an interesting series. I'll have to check that out. The next one, it's one you wanted to discuss that I had recently read. It's Dennis Cooper's The Marbled Swarm.
Ah, yes.
This is definitely an interesting book. I've only read one other Dennis Cooper book before this, My Loose Thread, which is a fairly straightforward novella about messed up teens and a school shooting. The Marbled Swarm is definitely a lot less straightforward. It starts out, it seems like it's going to be this sort of sedan novel where this rich psychopath buys a chateau from a family where one of the sons died in what seemed like an accident. As it goes forward, we find out that it wasn't an accident, that the boy was actually murdered. At first, the boy's brother takes responsibility for it, but later we find out that the father was the one responsible for it. And we're introduced into one of the major recurring themes of the book is there are turned out to be secret passages in the book where the father had been
Secret passages in
walking
the house, right?
or
Yeah, yeah.
in the house. I kind of got them mixed up. One could argue there's secret passages in the book, but secret passages in the house where the father would walk through, where he would spy on the on his sons, like masturbating and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and the first, I want to say like first chapter or first section ends with him taking with the rich psychopath who doesn't have a name, with him taking uh, the dead boy's brother, Sergi, I think his name is, away from the chateau in the trunk of his car and basically sort of messing with him and torturing him on the way back to Paris. But then it sort of like abandons that plot thread and jumps back to when let's see to when the narrator killed his own brother, and we find out things like that his home also had secret passages where his father would spy on him on the on him like masturbating and uh, would like and that he also had like a semi incestuous relationship with his both his father and his brother. Um,
There's a
and
scene.
af-
Go ahead.
and after that, it sort of like keeps spiraling back. There's a part where we find out that someone he knew had a home with also with secret passages in it that the father would walk through and spy on his sons. And that at one point in this home, he put on a play about a father who would spy on his sons through secret passages in his home. So it seems to be, I almost want to call it musical, like it's taking this same theme and strumming it in slightly different variations until we get to the very end, where it sort of ends on a strange, ambiguous note. I think one thing it does is it takes a lot of inspiration from the French idea of the Nouveau Roman, which is this idea of taking plot and character out of the novel and presenting something that's more quote unquote objective.
Hmm.
Uh, Elaine Rob Grillet did that a lot, especially with Topology of the Phantom City, which is one of the few books I've read where I can truly say there is no plot or character. It's like it suggests a topology of a city that no longer exists. And like the Marbled Swarm, the title comes from the um, what basically this is the fancy way that the narrator has of speaking. Uh, it's his father called it the Marble Swarm,
Yeah,
and he
that
used
is
it as a
so.
tool.
It is so mysterious the way it's alluded to. It's like the way he describes that language. I can't make sense of what it is.
Yeah, to
It's.
me, it's basically just a smooth talk, just a manipulative smooth talk,
Hmm.
which one could argue that that's what the entire book is, because one could argue that like most of the book didn't even actually happen. Uh, that it's the narrator like throwing these weird scenarios and ideas at us until he runs out of them
Hmm.
and has to face like his own personal demons.
That's
That's kind of what
interesting.
I got from it.
That's what you got from it. I got what I got from it was that it was very real. That and he was totally unashamed of all these horrible transgressions against humanity. What's interesting is the scene where he does kill his brother. There's a point where he's separating his jaw or whatever on the floor, and it's described as looking like an alligator. You remember that?
Yeah, yeah, that was part of it. From what I recall in that book, his brother is also wearing some kind of like a cosplay costume
Yeah,
because he's
the
very into
Flatsos.
manga.
Talk about the Flatsos. You remember them, right?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what the flatzos are. From what I got, it involves some kind. Um, from what I got, that flatzo was a reference to super flat, which is like a Japanese art movement that it's like a Japanese pop art movement that incorporates anime images into like highbrow art, sort of like Warhol incorporated advertising imagery into his art.
Okay.
There's even like a reference to a super flat piece, "My Lonesome Cowboy," I can't by Murakami. I can't remember his first name, but I don't know if you've ever seen that piece. But basically, it's a nude anime figure with who's that's jerking off, and like there's a geyser of cum coming out of its dick, and it's sort of waving its hand to um, make its cum into a lasso. Uh, so that definitely plays into the homoeroticism that runs throughout it.
Wow.
But yeah, yeah, part of the reason why I didn't get that it was real is because of the end where he, talks about how he's a cannibal who likes to kill young boys and eat them.
And he's a
Uh,
quadriplegic or a paraplegic too by the end, right? Isn't he?
well, I know that he does mention that his legs don't work at the end,
Mm-hmm.
but what I got at the end was that he claims to have become a cannibal because he saw a movie where his actual father, his biological father, who was an actor, played a cannibal. So I got the impression that he was sort of he really wanted to be like his father. He was desperate for an actual father because his biological father was not in his life. He was basically just a sperm donor, and his real father, it had no connection to him. Like that's where I got like the secret passage thing, like that. They have no like real face-to-face connection. The father has to move around these secret passages in order to connect with the son.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I sort of got the idea that the cannibalism he talks about is just a sort of a way of connecting with his real father, and that it's something that he doesn't actually do, especially because when they mention like killing and eating surgery, he just sort of like throws it out in a single paragraph like it's an unimportant detail.
He's very cold and clinical in his descriptions of what he has supposedly done, right? So,
Right. So it's I definitely think that's what the book is about. It's about the idea of throwing out these ideas and these fancy words to um, obfuscate like the very real problems that he holds within. So it's like the idea of trying to use language, fancy language, to get around very real the very real neuroses and dark desires that exist within someone, which, from what I've read of Dennis Cooper's other work, is a big part of it, like the frustrations of language and how it can't always express, what someone is truly feeling.
right. Um, I guess. See, I guess I'm more of a literal reader, though. I guess I just I read things more on a like with a through line instead of trying to say, well, he's not really writing what he's written, he's writing something else in disguise. I guess I have a problem with figurative writing, although I'm okay with metaphor. I take a lot of those things I read more literally. And I think it's more fun to take this story more literally. It's like it matches Hannibal in terms of intensity at times. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it definitely does at times. For me, the reason I don't think it's like necessarily like metaphorical or anything like that. It's more like the narrator is directly addressing the reader. And there are a lot of times where he seems to be throwing out clues like "I'm bullshitting you,"
Hmm.
like messages of like, "Oh, you'll learn about that later," things like that, or like where he talks about like the marbled swarm, which is basically like using fancy language to manipulate people. And he mentions how his father had to rely on it much more because his father wasn't as good looking as he is, and since he's good looking, he's um, able to just rely on being good looking a lot of the time to gain people's trust.
Right. Um, okay. Anything else on the marbled swarm?
Hmm. Um, Not too much I can think of. I do think that it's an interesting book, but maybe not the best place to start with Dennis Cooper because there does seem to be a metafictional element to it where he sort of draws you in with like he's going to do this sort of Sedaean kind of story about a cannibal buying a chateau where you think he's going to like play out the 120 Days of Sodom, but instead it just swirls into something else entirely.
Mm. Where would one start with Dennis Cooper? This was the only book I've read by him. Where would one start with Dennis Cooper? Frisk or what?
Um, for the one that seems to be most popular and most semi-straightforward is The Sluts, which apparently is written, which I've only read excerpts from that, but it's basically a story told through uh, things like it's a story told through reviews on a gay escort website. That's like the format of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a this like reviews of a male prostitute um, to tell the story about them.
What was that book that was written in a haunted IKEA store, or it was written about? It was about a haunted IKEA store or something. What was that called?
Um, Horror Store.
Yes. Who wrote that?
Gary Hendricks.
The paperbacks from Hell guy.
Yes, that he wrote that as well.
Wait, Grady Hendrix, isn't it?
Oh, Grady Hendricks. I
Okay.
don't know for whatever reason I keep thinking his name is Gary.
uh, I don't know what made me think of that, but so what did you say we should start with Dennis Cooper? Which one?
the
The
the Sluts
Sluts.
looks like a good place to start. My Loose Thread. That's not a bad place to start since it's a fairly straightforward narrative, but it's I would also say not it's definitely not as good as the Marbled Swarm.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of madmen committing, gruesome acts in chateaus, this is a very interesting coincidence because when I found out we were going to be talking about Migali and the Marbled Swarm and other decadent, books about decadence and debauchery, uh, I fished this one out of the closet called "Portrait of an Englishman in His Chateau." It was written. It was published anonymously in 1953 in Paris, and it was described by the author at the time as his intentions were for it to be the last word in eroticism and sadism, like a kiss of peace bestowed on the principle of evil. And uh, it's also been described as a dispatch written from the frontiers of depravity. Now, there's a funny story to go with this book. Because I originally purchased it in like 2001 or two. I think it's when it came out re-released from Daedalus Press, and my mom actually got curious and read it before me. Oh boy, she's never reacted this way to a book. This is a woman who took me to the library every weekend growing up, as a small kid, and would encourage me to use my imagination, and read me Winnie the Pooh and such. And, she understood why I was fascinated by, like, the Child's Play novelization with Chucky on the cover and, Where the Wild Things Are. And she encouraged that fascination with the weird and the dark and the gruesome and, monsters. She's never reacted the visceral way she reacted to this book. She emerged from the bedroom with this in her hand originally, and she said, "If I were you, I would throw this thing into the trash." And she proceeded to describe to me the contents of this book by Andre Pierre de Mendiargues. The author's name came out later. It was originally published anonymously.
Of course, it's a Frenchman.
Yeah, and he dips into surrealism, and also it's like a tribute to the Marquis de Sade's work, and Torture Garden by Octave Mirbeau. But she encouraged me, she convinced me so thoroughly that this book was nothing but filth that I compliantly threw it in the trash, only to repurchase it a few years later out of curiosity, because the lore, the legend of it grew in my mind. See, this happens sometimes. When I think something's not going to be very valuable, I dispose of it, only to realize later that it was like a gem. And I have to track it down. It becomes this like quest for me. You ever get that experience?
Yeah, definitely.
So I bought it again, and I reread it I read it a few years ago. It is about this guy, yet another narrator with no name, who goes to stay with this English diplomat named M.D. Montecule. Montecule? I don't. And he has a chateau called Gamahooch. And as a guest in this chateau, the narrator is exposed to unparalleled depravity. I mean, he's taken to these little, fenced-in areas with huts called Lucky Cow Sheds, where, basically sex with, the bovine persuasion is enacted. You know what I mean? Basically,
Yeah.
sex with cows. Not sure what purpose that served, but okay, that was the aperitif, as they would say, to his main course, as it were. As he gets further into this night of debauchery, or this weekend of debauchery, staying with the English diplomat in his chateau, and keep in mind that this guy, he used to take these Nazi prisoners of war, and he would acquire them as subjects to torture. He acquired them through French, soldier friends of his, French diplomats and such. So 1953. This would be about, almost 10 years after World War II concluded. So where the mood is at, in Europe. So he acquires these Nazi prisoners of war, and he tortures them, to no end. And the narrator is served like shriveled cow tits as an appetizer on this heated dinner table that is set to the temperature of blood. That's the way it's described. I don't know, but and from there on, they bring in this poor young German girl, and they proceed to put her in a tank on the floor with octopuses. Now, you may be thinking, octopuses, they're harmless. What's the big deal? It's just gross, is all. No, they are they savagely maul this girl when they're holding her under. I mean, they're latching onto her face. Those suctions are like latching onto her skin. You've seen people who go to these masseuses and they get the fire cupping treatment, right? Where they put those things on the back of, on their backs. They light it real fast and it sticks to their backs.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's like that, only 100 times stronger. The suction cups on octopi are very uh, uh, concise, I guess. And yeah, man, they're just cutting her up and leaving all these welts on her and everything. And they proceed torture 100 different ways. And let's see, they are served feces that is human feces that is cooked to the point of being like a gourmet delicacy. Uh, like with like rose jam and garlic on, baked in or something. I don't. Like I said, we're dealing with a lot of books that specialize in debauchery this week. Have you noticed? And so,
Yeah,
and then there is the frightening main event of the novel, and this is the most chilling, and it's almost hard to put in words, but they take this mother and her baby and they skin the baby alive in front of the mother, and then the Sir M.D. Moncule proceeds to rape the mother, who is in shock. I think at one point the mother even foams at the mouth from just pure adrenaline, just shock, just total numbness of being, It's
right,
very hard to read. And Andre Pierre de Mendiargue's concluding statements in this book, I'm going to go ahead and spoil it because this is not a plot novel. It's more of a tribute to surrealism and try to top the decadence of previous authors. The concluding thoughts of the author Mendiargues are that Eros, the god of love, he says that Eros is a dark god, and how he can't stop thinking about one of the temptresses in the chateau who kept him entertained all weekend, and how he can't stop thinking of her anus and how it puckered and quivered and how her farts were like perfume. So that in a nutshell is Portrait of an Englishman in His Chateau. I don't know whether if we were to put that book up against Marbled Swarm, I don't know which book would emerge the victor, but I'd say it would be a close match. And something tells me you're going to go read this one now. I don't know.
yeah. I've actually had that one on my to read list for a while now.
Oh yeah. Well,
I didn't know it was that messed up, but for some reason I just came across it one day and the title caught my eye. Portrait of an Englishman in a Chateau.
Yeah, it to me it's wicked, and like I said, my mom convinced me to throw it away the first time, and like I said, it kind of built up the mystique around it for me. Uh, just like when I got rid of Altered Beast for Sega Genesis and spent years looking for it in flea markets to no avail. I get rid of things and then I regret it. It's you know things, video games, books, people. But what is next on your list?
Next on my list is you mentioned it, so let's go into this one. It's Megally by Thierry Jonquet. I hope I pronounced that right. It's there's two storylines going on there. One revolves around three characters: Richard, a top tier plastic surgeon, his mistress Eve, and a thief named Alex. Richard is incredibly abusive to his mistress Eve. He shouts at her. I think, like, if I recall correctly, the first thing he says to her is, because he keeps her locked up in a room and has like a speaker system that he talks to her through. I think the very first words says to her through the speaker system is, "Hurry up and get dressed, you piece of shit." And he does things like forces her to prostitute herself, which, as messed up as it is, it's actually one of the funnier scenes in the book because he mentions that one of her regular clients is a repressed homosexual who pays to walk around and hold her hand while he masturbates and screams about random things. Um, and what happens is the character Alex, he's the petty thief. He kills a cop during a bank robbery gone wrong, and he finds out about Richard from seeing him on a TV show. And so what he plots to do is kidnap his Mistress Eve, who he thinks is like his wife, and basically blackmail him into giving him plastic surgery, so the police won't ever recognize him. And then there's a second storyline that runs through the book that's told in second person, where one of Alex's good friends, Vincent, is kidnapped by a figure who he just calls Meagerly throughout the entire thing. And at first, the the person who kidnaps him legally just like starves him, tortures him, but then he starts treating him nicer, um, like giving him a piano to play, bringing him food and water, and things like that. And that's the two storylines do come together at the end. I don't want to spoil that because it is the twist ending at the end is one of the most. It's genuinely one of the most like shocking twist endings I've seen in a psychological thriller. Um,
Does the
uh,
sister or this Migli develop? Do they develop Stockholm syndrome?
um, yeah, that's let's see, what's the opposite of that called? Lima syndrome,
No, what is that?
where that's like the opposite, where the kidnapper develops feelings for the person he kidnaps. So both actually play a part in the Stockholm syndrome and Lima syndrome.
Hmm.
There's Stockholm syndrome with Vincent to Neely, and there's throughout the book there's Stockholm syndrome or Lima syndrome with Richard toward Eve, this woman he's abusing.
Hmm. Now,
Yeah, I didn't talk a lot about it, but like I said, the ending of it is like a such a big slap in the face that I really don't want to spoil it.
mhm. I gotta check this out. I remember it's got a tarantula on the cover, just right.
Right. Megally. There's actually like another translation that calls it tarantula.
Hmm. Cool. Um, all right, this I think this is the last book I'm going to throw out. You go as much as you need to, but the last one that I want to talk about today, I've acquired this interest in Rome lately, uh, and I've tried to trace the lineage of Roman emperors, starting from Julius Caesar and on down through Tiberius and Caligula, Claudius, Nero, etc., etc. It's really funny just uh, how meaningless, or not meaningless, just how unsacred life was back then, And well, I'll talk briefly about Caligula as an example, and I'll get to the book in a second. But Caligula, for instance, he goes down with a fever after winning, like major acclaim from the Praetorian Guard and the senators, and the the, the common folk of Rome. And he comes down with this fever, and he's never the same, or maybe it brings out his, darker traits. But he gets a bridge, dedicated to him, and he forces the senators to wade in until their heads are underwater. And when they try to surface, he knocks him back down there with an oar. He's like, "What do you think you're doing? Surfacing for air? Get back down there." I mean, this guy was cruel, man. Some of those senators actually drowned that day. Then he goes to attack Britain. Okay, uh, in that constant quest for expansion of the empire. What does he do? He stops in the middle of the march and says, "Men, cease the attack on Britain. Let's collect seashells for the rest of the day." And so they do. They collect seashells. They turn around and go back to Rome and show their booty or plunder of seashells and turn them into jewelry, having never even crossed into Britain. How do you like that? This is the mood of the Roman Empire. It's very fickle. Alliances were constantly shifting, kind of like America in 2018, huh? But seriously, one consistency with all this constant, betrayal and double like two-facing and double agenting, I guess. Oh, you're typing something. What are you typing?
Yeah, I'm trying to type in the name of this book. What was it again?
Oh, 69 AD, Year of the Four Emperors. I'm getting to that. I'm just trying to set the mood right now with what the Roman Empire, the spirit of it is, as I understand it. Now, the thing is, so life is almost forfeit, But one consistency, the Praetorian Guard is constantly assassinating emperors when they fall out of favor and they don't, they cut their pay, they don't pay them right, or they disagree with a military decision, right? Or they raise taxes, or they sleep with their sister or something. Some emperors get away with that, and some emperors don't. But the consistency is that I'm led to believe that the Praetorian Guard actually had more power throughout the centuries of the Western Roman Empire than the actual emperors did, judging by how many were assassinated by the Praetorian Guard through the years, including some that were still teenagers. Okay, are you ready for that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the book is called 69 AD, Year of the Four Emperors, and I think I don't remember the name. It's Morgan something, or it's an Irish sounding name, but
Gwen Morgan. I
yes,
brought it up on Goodreads.
yeah, Gwyn, I think.
Yeah.
And by the time we get to this period where Nero is declared an enemy of the state, while he's touring Greece as a musician and an actor or some shit, and just totally going off in his own world when he's supposed to be fucking leading the biggest empire in the world, right? The greatest, expansion, the most cultured, growing civilization at that time, right?
Right.
Nero gets word that he is now an enemy of the state, and he meets with his closest friends and family and fellow musicians and artists and everything, and in their company he slits his throat. And we all know the famous phrase that he utters before he dies. You know what it is, right?
I wish that Rome had one throat that I may slit it. Something like that.
No, that reminds me more of Karl Panzram.
I was certain Nero said. Oh no, wait, it was Caligula that said that.
Okay, well, Nero, as he's slitting his throat, he says, "What an artist dies in me." He really shouldn't have been emperor. I mean, he could have been much better just being a bard or an actor or an artist or something, but whatever. So from here, this codgerly old man named Galba um, gains enough favor with the Praetorian Guard and the senators that he is declared emperor. See, that's the thing in usurping in the Roman Empire, is that you have to get enough people to declare you Roman emperor if and there were different factions with the senators and the Praetorian Guard, and you have to keep the plebes in mind, the common folk, the village idiots in mind too. Their opinion is less significant, but they can still revolt if you don't keep them satisfied with bread and circuses, right?
Right.
So Galba assumes command of the Roman Empire, and I think he immediately, raises taxes. But he's very conservative in his approach. Yet he eschews most ceremonial things that make the empire what it is. Now, Otho comes into play. He's trying to gain enough favor to say that he's emperor. He's worthy to be emperor. Now, Otho so loved Nero as I think, either a cousin or a friend, that he gave up his wife to let Nero marry his wife. That the ultimate cuck, Otho. Literally a cuck. Now, Otho gains enough men to strike Galba. Galba can barely mount a horse. He's so lame and weak and old, there are several guards that are struck down and die defending Galba. Otho isn't even present to kill Galba, but the man he sends to do the job, whose name escapes me at the moment, reports that Galba's last words as he exposes his throat. A lot of emperors and throat slitting, Galba exposes his throat and he says, "If it be for the good of Rome, then strike me." Now, you would think that if that's what he actually said, that would gain some, like, posthumous favor. No. The poor toothless old coot Galba is beheaded from there. His body is, just dragged through the streets on ropes, I think. These guys were wicked. I mean, just relentlessly brutal. The guy who kills Galba and beheads him, because Galba has no teeth, he has to stick his thumb in Galba's mouth and carry it like you would an old milk bottle, and present it to Otho, the new emperor declared. And then I think they place it on a pike for display, as it rots. It's just like a scene out of Game of Thrones, right?
Right.
I mean, this is exactly what Game of Thrones builds off of. This and the British Empire, later and everything, but and the War of the Roses. But so then Otho tries to bring back a little bit more of the Nero-ish flavor to the Roman Empire, but he also tries to be more fair. His reign is very short-lived. I think he may be emperor for a total of, I don't know, 7 to 8 months. And then comes this guy, if I recall, he's a fat, greasy guy who is extremely, self-indulgent. He drinks himself into a stupor. His name's Vitellius. Drinks himself into a stupor and raises taxes even higher than Galba did. I think Otho cut the taxes. Well, Vitellius raises them higher than Galba did originally. And get this, the soldiers raid the common folks' homes and stay in them. These common folks, these poor people who barely have rights, to exist as it is, they can be executed for anything, really. They are forced to board in their homes with soldiers at Vitellius's discretion. Vespasian, who is stationed, I think, maybe somewhere in Capri or something, catches wind of this. And keep in mind, word travels much slower then. It can take an entire, month or season for word of a conquered territory to reach, so, depending on the location, to reach its intended target,
Mm-hmm.
You still with me?
Yeah.
So Vespasian catches wind of this, and he's the most just of the four. But he has had an arrangement since Nero was emperor, unless the documents were forged, there is some document that Vespasian produces that says that in the event of an emergency, now if I read this right, because the historian who wrote this, Gwen Morgan, is not very into dramatizing the content, so it's a bit cloudy and overly academic at times. So, but this is what I get out of it. Vespasian gets word of Vitellius's, totally, out of control reign there, and the previous two emperors who did nothing, just the chaotic civil war, sensibility of this time period of 69 AD. Vespasian catches wind of it with his sons Titus and Domitian. They and several soldiers, they conquer Vitellius's armies and move on him. He's slain in the town square on the steps. And as he's dying, he says, "And to think, for a moment, I was your emperor." They always have these dramatic, final words. So
They want to go out on a high note.
yeah, yeah, it's very Shakespearean. But so Vespasian murders Vitellius. His head is piked, and his body is most likely drugged through the streets just as much, because they have to rub it in. Vespasian assumes control of the Roman Empire for, I would say, 10 years, if I'm recalling correct. I'm not looking at my notes right now, and he goes on to restore some prestige and honor to the Roman Empire. And that's where, of course, where the book ends. But Titus will inherit the empire later and die of a mysterious sudden fever, which his brother Domitian is accused of, supplanting him with, wherein Domitian takes over and is just like Nero or worse, okay? And on, and there are other examples of debaucherous emperors and there are honorable emperors, but there you have it, 69 AD, year of the four emperors. I found this fascinating. I find that whole period fascinating, and I almost find it a tragedy that the Western Roman Empire did not last longer in history. But that's a story for another time. What are your thoughts on all this? How much do you know about that period?
I'll be honest, I don't know that much about the Roman Empire. I do have, I can't remember the author, but it's just called A History of the Roman Empire, which is like considered like the definitive
Gibbon.
word on the
Is it
empire.
Gibbon?
Gibbon, I
Yeah.
think that's what it is. Don't quote me on that though.
Yeah.
And I've also read Gore Vidal's novel Julian.
Oh wow.
Um, what that's about is it's about the last pagan emperor of the Roman Empire. The before him it was Constantine, who was the first Christian emperor. Julian, of course, wanted to bring Hellenism back to the Roman Empire, but he was supplanted when he died in battle by a Christian emperor. Um, and in that book, Gore Vidal is very clear that he thinks that that was like the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire, and that it was the end of almost the end of a golden age. Um, I don't know if I agree with that, but I definitely recommend that novel.
It's not a perfect era by any means, but they were able to accomplish a lot in a very, very, shall we say, burdensome times, right?
Right.
What else, what's your next one?
My next one, and since that was your last one, this will be my last one. And since got on the theme of depravity, I thought I'd bring up Japanese Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edogawa Rampo. Edogawa Rampo is, if you, his name is basically Edgar Allan Poe. This is his pen name. It's basically Edgar Allan Poe said in a Japanese accent. Um, and he was actually the pretty much the first Japanese mystery writer. He A lot of his early work was detective stories, and there are a few detective stories in Japanese Tales of Mystery and Imagination. But what he's most known for is his bizarre and sort of grotesque psychological stories. Like the first one in this book is called The Human Chair.
Yes,
What that?
it's funny because I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's funny because I just pulled this off my shelf. I just happen to have this same book, and that's the story I remember the most from it. The Human Chair. Talk about that.
Yeah, so what it's about is this woman who is an editor for a magazine. She gets a letter. The letter makes up the bulk of the story. It's about a chairman, and the letter is a from a chairmaker who talks about how he's a very ugly man who is really his only the only reason anyone wants anything to do with him is the fact that he is such a good and skilled chairmaker. And what he does is he comes up with this plan to create a hollowed out chair that he can hide inside so he can sneak into a hotel and steal things. But what he discovers while he's hiding in the chair is that he has women sitting on him, which he very much enjoys because women won't touch him otherwise. And as he tells about how the chair was passed around to another owner, and the next owner turned out to be this woman editor of this magazine. And he ends the letter by saying that he wants to see her in person, and that she should like leave some kind of signal that she wants to see him, if she wants to like see him in person.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she's horrified by this idea because it's a very like creepy idea. The idea of someone like hiding in a chair you're sitting in, and that they're getting off on you sitting on them. But then she gets another letter stating that it was just a story, and the writer wants the feedback, um, which in my opinion doesn't make the story any less creepy. Um, Probably the most fucked up story in the book is called The Caterpillar.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, what that's about is it's about a soldier who was severely injured in combat. He had both his arms, both his legs blown off. He's deaf now, and he's mute, and he basically he can only um, he can only see. That's the only thing that he can do. Um, and of course, the story follows his wife taking care of him, and she discovers that she sort of gets off on bullying him since he can't really do anything. He can't talk. He can't really protest or anything. And at one point, she gets overly excited and puts out his eyes with her thumbs. Um, and of course, as soon as she realizes what she's done, she tries to get help for him. But before help can arrive, he crawls out like a caterpillar and drowns himself in a well. So you can see why he's put into the sometimes put in the category of eroguro, erotic grotesque, because he wrote stories like that. And that story was actually controversial in Japan, not really because of the content, but because it was seen as a sort of protest against Japanese militarism, which, from my understanding, he didn't really intend that, but it does still kind of come through. It's almost like a version of Johnny Got His Gun. Um, so
Wow.
there's also there's another one called definitely one of the more strange stories is called The Hell of Mirrors, which is about a going back to depraved rich people. It's about a student who's obsessed with mirrors and telescopes, and he's rich and he has plenty of money to indulge in his to get to buy like a observatory, which he mostly uses to spy on women, and um, he sets up these rooms where he would, where it was just like basically like a miniature hall of mirrors where he would go in and have sex with the maid, and one day like the rich guy's friend comes in to find that there's this like giant ball in the middle of the room, and none of the servants know how to get in because there was apparently a door on this ball that the rich guy used to get inside, but he wasn't able to get out because apparently the door handle broke off. So they sort of brute force their way in, and they find him inside, and they realize that it was basically a reverse mirror ball, a ball with a bunch of mirrors on the inside, along with lights, so he could like climb in naked and basically watch himself masturbate, I guess. But being stuck in there with nobody to pull him out or anything like that, he basically went insane, and they pull him out, and he's basically like a complete gibbering lunatic
Wow.
at by the time they get him out of there. Um, Another one in a similar vein is called The Red Chamber, which is about like a sort of midnight society of a bunch of guys who go to a bar and they tell each other gross stories and weird stories. And one of them talks about what he says is a true story of how he would murder people, but he would do it in ways that didn't make him accountable. Like he talks about his first murder was he comes across a guy who was dying in the streets from an injury, and he asks him like, "Where is the nearest doctor?" And he points him to a doctor that's not very skilled, not initially on purpose, but when he realizes that's what he did, he gets a thrill out of it. So he starts doing things that quote unquote accidentally get people killed, like telling a blind man to like directing a blind man to walk into a hole in the ground. And final one, the ultimate one he commits is he derails a train with a giant rock, and of course pretends that that the rock was put down there by accident. And then at the end he appears to commit suicide, but um, he basically comes back up and shows that the suicide he supposedly committed was completely staged, and he reveals that everything that he had said to them was complete and total bullshit. And
Also, he
the
spoke the marbled swarm too.
yeah, exactly. There's another connection there, and like and then the narrator of that story, who of course was listening to this guy, he says that that's the last time their society ever met,
Hmm.
because nobody could top that.
Wow.
Then there is there's one supernatural story in there called "The Traveler with the Pasted Rag Picture," where a guy on a train meets another guy who has a ragdoll picture, which is basically just a picture, of course, with images made from rags. And he tells the story about how his brother, like when his brother went up to an observatory, he fell in love with a woman he glanced in the crowd, and he soon realizes that the woman he glanced in the crowd was the woman in the rag picture. And so, of course, he tells him, I mean, she's not real, but he somehow finds a way to walk into the rag picture. So he's now living in there with her. Um, and I'm not sure how to describe it. It's described in a very surreal way. Like he describes him as just like sort of walking off into nowhere and somehow ending up inside the rag picture. It's a very fascinating image. Um, and like I said, there are detective stories in there. Like the psychological test is, it's almost like a detective story in reverse, where we see uh, the person committing the crime, and the mystery of it is how the cop who gets him to confess to it puts him through a psychological test that gets him to confess. And there's also the twins, which is about another mystery story about a guy who murdered his twin and tried to take his place, but accidentally leaves behind evidence showing that he's guilty of the murder and gets found out eventually. So there's a lot of like really um, sort of weird fiction in like the almost the traditional sense in here. Mystery, erotic, grotesque. It's just like a really amazing mixture of stories, and I really want to read more of Edogawa Rampa's work because it's um, this was just like a great collection.
Yeah, did you make the distinction that he's basically like considered the Edgar Allan Poe of the Japanese literary community?
Yeah,
I've heard that before.
and he definitely is. He took that because he originally wanted to write detective stories, but he did end up writing like a strange and grotesque stories in the same way Edgar Allan Poe did.
Very cool. It's funny that our tastes kind of sync up like this. That I'm able to just pull these books off the shelf that that you're reading now. It's like, oh, I had that all along. Uh, very cool, Ben. I'd like to have you back more often, man. We should definitely do this more often, and even not just to talk about books, but just current events. Kind of bring you out of your shell on here. I could use a co-host, man.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in doing that.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the quiet place, brother. And that's not literally quiet. We can make some noise. We'll make some noise anytime. Any closing thoughts, brother?
Hmm. Not that I can think of at the moment, but I would definitely recommend anyone who's listening go find these books and read them because they will enrich your life.
Yes. And you do you still have the website Cultured Vultures?
Yes, and I have my own website. Um, it's a blogspot website, and it's a very long URL. Just Google my name, and you'll be able to find me.
Mm-hmm. All right. And any release dates on those books you mentioned at the beginning of the show?
No release date set for Story of the Why. With The Complete Idiot's Guide to Saying Goodbye, we're aiming for a late August release. So we're hoping that's when that comes out.
Congratulations, man. Can't wait to
Thank you.
read it. And yeah, man, I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the future. And I'll see you next show, man.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is the beginning of a new era in the quiet place.
like this.
You're all fucking autistic.